Welcome to another deep dive here on Token Trends Weekly. I'm your host, Max Ledge, and with me, as always, is our resident DeFi analyst, Sasha Coyne. And today, usually when we think about a massive financial heist, there's, this expectation of brute force.
Oh, totally. Like alarms blaring, that kind of thing?
Right. You picture someone literally drilling through a concrete wall or like blowing a vault door off its hinges. The damage is structural. It's right there for everyone to see.
Yeah, but what we're looking at today is completely different.
Yeah, because today we are looking at a heist where the vault door remained perfectly locked, the concrete was totally untouched, and yet nearly $290 million just evaporated.
Wow.
It nearly took down the largest lending market in crypto.
And honestly, that lack of structural damage is, it's what makes this case so chilling to me. Because in most crypto exploits, a smart contract is manipulated. Like the code is literally broken, and the postmortem always points to this specific jagged line of faulty logic. But on April 18th, 2026, the smart contracts functioned exactly as they were written.
Which is wild.
It is. The vulnerability wasn't in the math on the blockchain. It was entirely in the trust assumptions that we just layered on top of it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today for you, the listener, is to dissect the largest DeFi exploit of 2026, which is the Kelp DAO heist.
A massive one.
Yeah, and we've compiled a huge stack of source material for this. We're talking incident reports, on-chain analyses from Galaxy Research, security breakdowns from Quill audits, and, man, some incredibly tense governance debates straight from the Hive's forums.
Oh, yeah, the forums are a mess.
A total mess. We want to understand how a tiny infrastructure misconfiguration in one single protocol acted like a domino that wiped out billions, literally billions of dollars in total value locked within hours.
Yeah, and to truly grasp the scale of the panic, we really have to look past the smart contracts. We have to examine the invisible plumbing of the ecosystem.
The infrastructure.
Right. This was a highly sophisticated infrastructure attack, and it's been preliminarily linked to the North Korean Lazarus Group, specifically their trader subunit. And they didn't break the rules of the blockchain. Instead, they basically weaponized the off-chain infrastructure that the blockchain actually relies on to communicate with the outside world.
And that perfectly illustrates the double-edged sword of DeFi composability, right?
Exactly. When you stack protocols together like Lego blocks, one weak link doesn't just, isolate the failure. It transmits that failure straight upward through the entire system.
So to understand how that failure transmitted, we first have to look at the point of entry. The target was Kelp DAO, right? Which is a major liquid restaking protocol issuing rsETH.
Yep. Yeah.
And because liquidity moves everywhere, Kelp used the layer 0 omnichain fungible token standard, the OFT standard.
Right, the OFT.
Yeah, to bridge their tokens across, I think it was roughly 20 different networks. So mechanically, if you lock your Mithi on Ethereum mainnet, the bridge sends a cryptographic message to, let's say, the Unichain network.
Exactly.
And it verifies the lock so Unichain can safely mint new backed rsETH over there.
Right. And the verification of that cross-chain message is, that's where the fatal operational flaw existed. Layer 0's architecture relies on what's called a decentralized verifier network.
A DVN.
A DVN, yeah. And the explicit security recommendation for a protocol of Kelp size, they were holding over $1 billion.
Right.
The recommendation is to use a multi-verifier setup, like a 2 of 3 or 3 of 5 configuration. That ensures that multiple independent, geographically distributed entities actually have to achieve consensus before any cross-chain mint or burn is auditized.
But looking at the Quill audits report, Kelp DAO completely ignored that.
It did.
They opted for a 1-of-1 configuration, which made Layer 0 Labs the sole verifier. Now, before we get into the actual attack, I just have to ask, why would a billion-dollar protocol make such an amateur architectural choice? Was it pure negligence, or is there some sort of operational incentive to strip away your own security?
It almost always comes down to friction, friction and operational costs. Multi-verifier networks, they require more gas to execute cross-chain transactions because obviously multiple signatures have to be verified on-chain.
Right, that makes sense.
It also increases latency. Waiting for 3 different node operators to reach consensus is going to take longer than just trusting one.
So they were basically just optimizing for speed.
Exactly. In the race to scale quickly and offer users the cheapest, fastest bridging experience, Kelp just traded robust security for marginal efficiency.
It's like having a bank vault with $1 billion, but you only hire one security guard. And that guy relies on a single walkie-talkie. Like, what happens if the walkie-talkie is hijacked?
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
Which set the stage for Lazarus. But if the DVN was a one of one, and Layer Zero Labs held the keys, the attackers didn't actually steal those private keys, did they?
No, they didn't have to. The DVN instance itself was actually never compromised. Instead, the attackers executed this highly targeted RPC poisoning attack.
RPC poisoning. Okay, explain that.
So the verifier doesn't inherently know what's happening on the blockchain. It queries downstream remote procedure call nodes, RPCs, to read the state of the network.
Right.
And the Lazarus group actually managed to compromise two of these specific downstream RPC nodes that the DVN relied upon.
It's like a high-frequency trading algorithm hooked up to a Bloomberg terminal.
Yeah.
The algorithm itself is executing flawlessly, but someone managed to spoof the data feed entering the terminal. You don't need to hack the trading firm. You just need to feed the algorithm hallucinated ticker prices.
That is the exact perfect way to visualize it. So the attackers swapped out the binary files on those two downstream nodes. And these modified binaries were designed to feed forged blockchain state data exclusively to the verifier's IP addresses.
Oh, wow. So only the verifier saw the fake data.
Right, while appearing completely synchronized and normal to the rest of the network.
But surely Kelp, or like the DVN, had other healthy RPC nodes to cross-reference. I mean, it wasn't just two, right?
They did, which is why the attackers simultaneously launched a massive DDoS attack against the remaining healthy nodes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they flooded the legitimate RPCs with traffic, knocked them offline, and forced an automatic failover to the poisoned infrastructure.
That is so sophisticated.
It is. Once the DVN was looking exclusively at the hallucinated data feed, the attackers submitted a forged cross-chain payload.
A payload claiming that 116,500 rsETH had just been burned on the Unichain network.
Yep.
And what's fascinating here is how blindly the system executed its instructions. The smart contract on Ethereum received a cryptographically valid signature from the one and only verifier it was instructed to trust.
Because it's one of one.
Exactly. Believing that the tokens were destroyed on Unichain, the Ethereum adapter just automatically unlocked and released 116,500 real rsETH to the attacker's wallet.
A payload worth roughly $292 million.
Yeah.
Extracted in a single transaction. And reading the incident report, the moment that transaction cleared on Ethereum, the malware on the poisoned RPC nodes actually deleted itself and wiped the local system logs to cover its tracks.
A completely surgical operation. They infiltrated the data layer, triggered the execution layer, and just vanished before the network even realized it had been blinded. So the attackers successfully printed $292 million in unbacked rsETH out of thin air. But like, creating fake tokens is only half the heist, right?
Oh, for sure.
You can't just dump 116,500 rsETH onto Uniswap or Curve without instantly crashing the price to zero due to slippage. So to actually extract the value, you need to swap it for hard liquidity. How'd they watch it?
They weaponized the composability of the DeFi ecosystem itself. So instead of trying to sell the unbacked rsETH on the open market, they used it as counterfeit collateral.
Oh, of course.
They moved immediately to Aave, which is the largest lending market in crypto, and they deposited the fake rsETH directly into Aave's smart contracts.
No, wait a minute. Aave is considered the blue chip standard of DeFi risk management. How did they accept 9 figures of unbacked collateral without triggering some kind of internal circuit breaker?
Well, it really comes down to Aave's aggressive risk parameters at the time, specifically a feature called E-mode or efficiency mode.
Right, I've heard of that.
Yeah, just 3 months prior, Aave governance actually approved rsETH for E-mode, which is designed for highly correlated assets. And it allowed users to deposit rsETH and borrow real ETH at a staggering 93% loan-to-value ratio.
So for every $100 of fake rsETH the attacker deposited, RD's automated systems just cheerfully handed them $93 in pristine real ETH.
Pretty much, yeah.
That leaves almost zero margin for error. But this brings up a mechanical question for me. Aave relies on Chainlink oracles to price collateral. If the RARFU was suddenly unbacked, why didn't the oracle catch the discrepancy and just crash the valuation before the attacker could borrow against it?
That's because of the mechanics of oracle pricing and market lag. Oracles like Chainlink, they don't evaluate the fundamental backing of a token.
Okay.
They aggregate the volume-weighted average price from secondary market liquidity pools. And because the Lazarus group hadn't dumped the stolen tokens on decentralized exchanges...
The secondary market price of rsETH hadn't moved a single basis point.
Exactly. The Oracle was looking at stable liquidity pools, completely unaware that the total supply had just been massively inflated off-chain.
The oracle is essentially a thermometer. It only reads the temperature of the room.
Yeah.
It has absolutely no way of knowing the furnace in the basement just exploded until the heat actually reaches the sensor.
Right. And so relying on that delayed read from the oracle, the attacker collateralized the forged rsETH and literally walked away with up to $236 million in real ETH and rsETH debt.
Wow.
By the time Kelp DAO's emergency multisig finally noticed the anomaly and froze their core contracts, which was 46 minutes later, the hard liquidity was already gone from a ref.
And the moment that freeze happened, the market realized what was going on. 18% of the entire circulating supply of rsETH was suddenly revealed to be entirely unbacked. This is where the contagion truly starts, right?
Oh, absolutely.
If you have real ETH supplied to rsETH, you suddenly realize the protocol has a gaping 9-figure hole in its balance sheet, collateralized by toxic assets.
It triggered a textbook bank run, just executed at the speed of the blockchain. Innocent suppliers rushed to withdraw their ETH before Aave became technically insolvent. And within a matter of hours, Aave's ETH pools hit 100% utilization.
Meaning there wasn't a single drop of liquidity left.
Nothing.
If you were slightly too late to the panic, the smart contract literally mathematically could not process your withdrawal.
And the panic didn't stop at Aave either, because capital flight is contagious. Over $8.45 billion in total value locked fled Aave's markets in just 48 hours.
That is insane.
And the broader DeFi ecosystem saw $13 billion in TVL wiped out as users unwound positions across stablecoin pools, yield aggregators, competing lending platforms, you name it.
So what does this all mean for the aftermath? I mean, the Lazarus group vanished with the real ETH. Aave is left holding a bag of toxic man death. Ultimately, someone has to absorb that multi-million-dollar bad debt. Who actually pays for this?
Well, that became the central, agonizing debate in the governance forums because Aave does have a mechanism for this called the umbrella module. Stakers deposit their Aave tokens to earn yield with the explicit agreement that if the protocol incurs bad debt, their stakes will be slashed to cover the shortfall.
But pulling from the governance notes, that umbrella module only held about $54 million. And more importantly, it only covers the Ethereum mainnet markets.
Precisely. And the attacker didn't just borrow on mainnet. They executed this across layer 2 networks like Arbitrum and Mantle as well.
Of course.
And because L2 deployments of Aave don't have their own heavily capitalized umbrella modules yet, the protocol was staring at a bad debt ranging from $124 million to $230 million, with only $54 million in insurance to actually deploy.
So you have this massive structural ambiguity. Aave governance was forced to choose between two incredibly painful loss allocation scenarios. And I was reading through these, and both are just brutal.
Yeah, they really are.
Scenario 1 is uniform socialization. The protocol basically just takes the total bad debt and spreads it evenly across every single person holding Aave, regardless of whether they are on mainnet or L2. So everyone takes a roughly 15% haircut.
Which heavily penalizes mainnet users, because they hold tokens that are theoretically still backed by the native Ethereum, locked in Kelp's primary vault.
Right.
They argue, and rightfully so, that they shouldn't have to pay for a bridge failure that happened on an entirely different network.
Which leads to scenario 2, which is isolation. Under this model, mainnet users are fully protected, but the damage is isolated strictly to the layer 2 users holding the OFT bridged version of the token.
Right.
And because those bridge tokens are effectively orphaned, L2 users on Arbitrum and Mantle would take a devastating 73% haircut.
And this surfaces a fundamental, unresolved conflict in cross-chain architecture. I mean, when you buy an asset bridge to an L2, do you have the exact same fungible rights as the person holding the native asset on mainnet?
That's the billion-dollar question.
When the bridge infrastructure collapses, is the asset still the asset, or is it just a worthless receipt?
Well, to prevent that 73% wipeout from destroying trust in Layer 2s entirely, we actually saw the formation of this ad hoc rescue coalition dubbed DeFi United.
The rescue squad.
The rescue squad. And the numbers here are wild. They pooled over $101 million with commitments pushing toward $163 million to just plug Aave's balance sheet hole.
It's massive.
Mantle stepped up with a $69 million treasury loan. Lido and EtherFi pledged funds. Even Aave founder Stani Kulichov pledged 5,000 of his personal ETH.
But, you know, it wasn't just altruism. It was naked self-preservation.
Really?
Yeah. Mantle recognized that if users took a 73% haircut on their network, liquidity would abandon Mantle permanently.
Oh, absolutely. They'd never come back.
And Lido and EtherFi knew that if Aave collapsed, the leverage engine driving the entire liquid staking sector would break. They literally bailed out Aave to save their own business models.
But the most controversial part of this rescue wasn't the loans. It was the intervention of the Arbitrum Security Council, who actively stepped in and froze roughly 30,000 of the attackers' ETH on their network. And I have to push back on this.
Come for it.
For years, the rallying cry of this whole industry has been, code is law. It's supposed to be permissionless. But the moment a 9-figure exploit hits, they rely on a centralized council to arbitrarily freeze a wallet. Doesn't that prove that decentralization is entirely conditional?
Honestly, you've hit on the deepest nerve in the industry right now. The Arbitrum intervention was undeniably necessary to recover funds for innocent users, but the mechanism? I mean, a multi-signature wallet controlled by a handful of elected insiders with the power to halt the chain.
It completely undercuts the premise.
Exactly. It proves that at a certain threshold of financial pain, code is law is immediately abandoned. It reveals that the ultimate backstop in DeFi isn't cryptography at all. It's emergency governance.
So Aave survived today because an emergency coalition threw a massive financial band-aid over the wound.
Whoa.
But a multi-million-dollar bailout is not a sustainable risk management framework. I mean, if aggressive parameters almost killed Aave, how did its competitors survive the exact same market conditions?
Well, the contrast is striking when you look at Sparkland, because Sparkland suffered zero direct bad debt from the Kelp exploit.
Yeah.
Zero. And it wasn't because they had some inside knowledge of the layer 0 vulnerability. It was because their core architecture is fundamentally geared toward containment rather than aggressive capital efficiency.
Interesting. Looking at their parameters, 3 months prior to the exploit, Sparkland actually exited the rsETH market entirely. But even if they hadn't, they utilized these strict rate-limited supply caps.
And that's the key differentiator. They place hard limits on how much of an asset can be deposited in a single block. So even if the attacker had targeted Sparkland, they couldn't have deposited $290 million in counterfeit rsETH all at once.
It would have just rejected it.
The system physically throttles the intake, which gives the protocol time to react. Furthermore, they use a 3-source median oracle, pulling from multiple diverse data feeds so that if one lags, the others trigger a pause.
Which brings us to the future of how these protocols assess collateral. Because there's a proposal gaining serious traction in Aave's forums right now by Robbie Greenfield, proposing a 7-factor asset safety tier. It's fascinating because it finally puts hard, objective math to these abstract infrastructural risks.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Greenfield's framework attacks the very philosophy that led to the EMO disaster in the first place. The prevailing thought was that wrapping or bridging a token simply adds utility.
Right.
Greenfield argues that wrapping a token multiplies risk. Every single time you wrap, bridge, or stake an asset, you add a new independent vector for total failure. It's a concept called rehypothecation depth.
Let's walk through the math of failure for this specific attack.
Yeah.
Because when you map the rehypothecation depth, it's mind-blowing. You start with native Ethereum, that's layer 1.
Yep.
You deposit that into Kelp to get rsETH, that's layer 2. You send it through the layer 0 OFT bridge, that's layer 3. And it finally arrives on Arbitrum as Jiro's rsETH. That is 4 distinct compounding layers of trust assumptions.
4 separate architectural dependencies, and any one of them going to 0 sends the final asset to 0.
Wow.
So Greenfield's proposal assigns a numerical score based on structural fragility. Things like bridge hops, oracle liquidity depth, verifier configurations. Under his math, any asset scoring a 10 or higher out of 14 falls into Tier 4, making it completely ineligible to be used as collateral.
And when they ran the bridged L2IIS through that framework, it scored a 12 out of 14.
Exactly, it scored a 12. Had that framework been in place, the asset would have been algorithmically blacklisted from Aave long before the Lazarus group even compromised those RPC nodes.
That's incredible.
The gap between that deeply fragile score of 12 and Aave's aggressive 93% loan-to-value ratio, that was the protocol's margin of catastrophic error.
And if you are listening to this right now and you hold yield-bearing tokens, this math matters directly to your portfolio. Whether it's complex crypto restaking or even traditional collateralized debt obligations, when you chase yield, you are inheriting the weakest link in that asset's entire supply chain.
Yep.
Yield is never free. It is always paid for with hidden structural risk. And if you don't understand the plumbing, you're usually the one left providing the exit liquidity.
The complexity obscures the leverage, and the leverage obscures the ultimate fragility of the system.
Okay, let's summarize what we've unpacked today. A billion-dollar protocol optimized for speed by utilizing a one-of-one bridge configuration. The Lazarus group didn't break a single smart contract. They compromised downstream RPC data feeds, spoofed the single verifier, and printed $290 million in unbacked rsETH.
Just printed it?
Right. And then they weaponized Air's ultra-aggressive E-mode parameters, draining real liquidity before the pricing oracles could even register the shock. It triggered a $13 billion systemic contagion, leading to structural debates over cross-chain asset rights, and forced a massive centralized bailout from the DeFi United coalition.
And, this raises an important question, one that really builds directly on your earlier pushback regarding the Arbitrum Security Council. This event fundamentally blurs the line between decentralized finance and what critics are now increasingly calling multi-sig-fi.
Oh, multi-sig-fi. I like that.
Right. I mean, if a protocol managing billions of dollars relies on a single centralized verifier to operate, and if surviving a crisis requires centralized councils to freeze wallets and backroom multi-million-dollar bailouts from network treasuries, is it truly decentralized?
Right.
Or has this ecosystem simply reinvented the traditional opaque banking system, complete with its bailouts, its systemic contagion, and its reliance on trusted insiders just running at the speed of code? It really leaves you wondering if true decentralization is an achievable reality or merely an illusion that just vanishes the exact moment a crisis hits.
That is a phenomenal, albeit terrifying thought to end on. Because if we are just rebuilding the traditional banking system on the blockchain, we might want to make sure we at least hire more than one security guard for the vault. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Don't forget to subscribe to Token Trends Weekly so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time.